Fabulous Tales and Fables ASAP by Owen T. Duggan. Story 8. Bad Lords and Ladies, Good Slave.
Bad Lords and Ladies, Good Slave. Section 4. The Lord Marquis's Fascinating Painting.
Cold night was chased by damp morning. "I knew it," somebody said. "There should have been female alpacans to go with the males. That would look more natural." "Doesn't matter," said someone else. "The Lord will view them at a distance, so it won't matter which sex they are. I just hope they keep grazing and don't go too close and ruin the view. Anyway, the enzyme pills were made to change men. They'd have to design a new type to change women into alpacans." The pair talking were carrying the riding crops and knives that marked them as esclavo-draveurs, slave drivers. They fell silent as they passed, and a short distance behind them came a line of slaves carrying a selection of long sticks, flat panels, boxes on straps, and bags. The bags must have food in them. They were female slaves.
"They don't have a mating season, right?"
said one female slave, drawing within earshot.
"So they won't get angry if they can't find women? They won't attack us, will they? Will they turn back into men and rape us?"
"What are you even talking about? You sound antisocial."
"Me antisocial? Try yourself."
"You try yourself."
"Well, didn't you hear the esclavo-draveurs? It's what they've been talking about. These alpacans used to be people. Male people. They were changed into alpacans, but still males."
"That's crazy. Totally mental. Like saying the world is round or something. Everybody knows the world is flat. Everybody knows..."
Shut up! Some worlds are round.
Be quiet.
I learned that information.
"Well, I hate you. You know that? That's my information. For you..." "Yeah, well, that information is useless."
Be quiet!
"Stay in file."
You stay in file.
Be quiet.
"That's my information. For you..." And the voices faded from clarity. As the line of female slaves passed, the survivor slave remained immobile behind the mound, wearing clumps of green for concealment. Dark, dry blood became earthy camouflage. Last in the line were two slave drivers, one saying, "This definitely looks frontierized," and the other parroting, "Definitely frontierized, compared to before." The travelers did not march away. Rather, they stopped. Down the way, the entourage were unloading boxes and panels. Their speech, hard to hear clearly, sounded mostly about where to put things. The survivor could only continue to watch. Standing up would mean being spotted. If only there were a way to get at their food bags. "I must be stealthy, like a panthera," the slave thought, and crept just a little closer, as a panthera would do. The people were setting up sticks, opening boxes. The boxes must have food in them. "Wait, more people are coming." Hardly moving a muscle, the survivor slave, wearing the blood of slaughtered prey, pinned herself to the ground, not even daring to raise an eyeball until whoever it was had passed on by. She kissed the soil, tasted it, embraced the turf. "I am a servant earthworm," she said, "the kind that grows to be King Anaconda. I'll be hungry enough to eat all of you in your sleep, one by one. Your bodies have food in them. The world is made of food. I'll eat the world. Listening, but not looking, it sounded to her like someone important was walking through. There was not the shuffling and clamor of slaves carrying stuff. Rather, there was the swish and stomp of people in fine clothing and footwear. She pictured it. And a familiar voice was speaking. "You will notice," said the scowling voice, "there is no trace at all of former habitation. Everything is returned to nature." The voice made the slave cringe. It was the voice of that chef Tasker that looked like a man, but wasn't. "Well done, chef. Well done." Could that be the Lord and Master come to inspect in person? Oh, to look upon the Lord Marquis for the first time, it had to be him. She wanted to look immediately, but resisted until the clamor and voices had passed. The green-headed, foliage-capped slave stole a peek. Yes, it was he. No doubt it was the Lord, her master, the one who could decide on a whim to save her skin or let her die. Such power was fascinating. You had to stand in awe of it. You had to submit to the truth of such information. With the arrival of the Lord Marquis and attendants, the assembly of 40 or so people was like a survey team about to plant wooden stakes, break ground, and lay out a new village here on this frontier. Slaves, attendants, and taskers apprenticed all got busy while Marquis, chef, and esclavo-draveurs oversaw. Panels were fixed vertically to frames made of finely crafted sticks. Racks of small sticks were set up on a table. Brushes. The small sticks are brushes. Judging from the setup, they were going to apply a treatment of water-resistant oil to the building panels, making them weather-resistant. That had to be it. They were making a small hut where the Lord could rest. That was the survivor slave's best guess. A selection of tin cans were pulled from the boxes and opened for the Lord's inspection. Those must be the treatment oil. The Lord must be experimenting with different types. He was indeed a grand and striking figure in his opulent robes. His poise was gracious and lordly, and he peered into the oil cans with hands behind his back, like he could divine something in there. His power was in his voice of command, not in his hands. He looked up, in the direction of the slave, camouflaged though she was. "He sees me." She couldn't help but squirm closer to the ground. He was pointing her way. Oh no, this is it. A few male attendants were ordered to walk out and investigate. To the oddball slave's surprise, they didn't come to her. They walked on by at her left. She knew what it had to be. They had spotted the other lord, the dark-feathered lord of the sky, the fattened Condoro. For this is how it went last night. At first, last night, there was despair. All of the nappy fluff bundles had been dragged away. There was nowhere to sleep. That meant dying of exposure in the night. To survive, the slave had gone ahead and had sought out the least aloof alpacans, choosing one. It took a while, but the slave calmed the animal, stroked it till it did not protest, got it comfortable with contact. Though the night had been very cold, sleeping next to the alpacan and its warm fleece meant not dying of exposure. In the night, Queen Panthera had come, had killed again. and in the morning the slave had found and scavenged from the carcass of the unlucky one. The panthera had taken from the corpse, the bits of it she liked the best, leaving most of it. That's when the broad-winged Condoro had come. Condoro, a true scavenger, a terrifying bird. Huge, one wing alone was the size of a slave. Condoro chased the slave away from the carcass, and it gorged. And the Condoro kept on gorging, seeming never to slake its hunger. It gorged so much it got too fat to fly, which made it pathetic and terrifying at the same time. Pathetic in its full-bellied state because its wings, however broad, were useless to lift it. Terrifying because the slave could not relax while the strikingly ugly Condoro was sticking around, boring its far-seeing eyes into her skull. The creepy Condoro looked ahead to next scavenging the slave at the first opportunity. That was how it went last night, and this morning. And the Condoro had remained out by the carcass, barely in view. That was one patch of ground the grazing alpacans declined to contest. Now slave, not daring to rise and look, had to guess that the 3 attendants were commanded to shoo the fat bird away. They must have done it because they returned to the tiny village, not having noticed the green and bloody survivor of the night, of the panthera, and of the Condoro. "What's he doing?" she asked herself. The Lord was stepping behind a panel out of view, then stepping into view and staring in her general direction. He was stepping over to the racks of brushes and selections of oil cans. Everyone else was made to sit or stand at some designated distance behind and beyond the Lord Marquis. It had to mean that the Lord required personal space and no interruption. No one was allowed to breathe his air or crowd him. He wanted to do the task of treating the panels himself, odd as that was. He was supposed to tell people to do tasks, not do tasks. There were 4 panels erected, vertically, all of them fixed to fine pieces of wood. A lower piece, like a tiny beam, supported the panel, kept it up off the ground, made it easy for the Lord to work, made it possible for the slave to see his feet. That was something. That meant a chance to move her body. Every time the Lord's face was out of view, the slave moved a bit, got blood circulating. She inched to the better concealment of a dirt mound, where she could perhaps peer around or over the edge or roll right behind onto her back. Trying this latter option, she was just in time to look up and see the face of an approaching animal, a fluffy-coated alpacan. "Go away, shoo!" The alpacan paused, deciding whether to be friendly or territorial. It stared at her. Was he the one who had shared his warmth last night? No. She opted to ignore him. Maybe he would go away. "To think," she said, "all that time I spent yesterday trying to make friends among you, and you choose this moment to get all chummy with me. Go away, they're going to find me." She remained on her back for some time, drinking in heat from daylight, drying out her front and the damp, dirty rags that were her clothing. All the while the alpacan grazed at her feet and around her chosen turf mound, sometimes on top of it, sometimes nudging her as though claiming the area for his own. He wouldn't stop bleating. Eventually, It was time to look and see if anything was changing. She rolled over, daringly, popped her head up, maybe a bit too high. The green cap of her concealment fell off. She froze. The Marquis Lord of the Frontier was looking directly at her. He seemed to freeze as well. Luck had abandoned her. Death was near. "Attendants!" he called. "Attendants! Come at once!" In moments, a pair of strong attendants were dragging a filthy, wild person over to face authority. One pair of slave drivers was ready with stabbing knives. "First, a Condoro tries to ruin the scene, and now this," said the Lord. "What is this all about? I don't want Condoros in view. They don't fit my composition. They don't belong. And I certainly don't want people. They're not natural. What are you? Did the Condoro hoist you up here from earth below?" Resigned to fate, death by the slicing blade of an esclavo driver, the slave had no words and no hopes, but felt compelled to turn and see what the Lord Marquis had been doing to the panel. Looking from this side for the first time at the panel on which the Lord was working, and then looking back out over the area from which the slave had been so roughly plucked, it was clear to her now what the Lord was trying to do. He was trying to make the surface of the panel resemble the landscape. He was using a variety of colored oils to do it. There was the murky horizon, so unlike the swirling bright sky above. There was the scattering of stone and mound. There were the alpacans grazing. Marveling at the resemblance, the slave could not help but utter the word, "Fascinating." "Hold on! That's one of the slaves I was managing," said the chef-tasker harshly. She had stepped in to handle the crisis. "He's a leftover from the herd of males that naturalized the area." "But if he's one of those," said the Marquis, "why hasn't he changed into an alpacan like the others? Was there a flaw in the dosage of enzymes?" "Be cautious. Best not look at slave. Best not speak directly." The tasker was strictly applying the rule of Varushan society, in which no lord or lady may deal directly with slaves. That go-between role was reserved for the tasker class of people, in fact, validating their existence. It was an important rule. This tasker said forcefully, "It will take me but a moment to solve this question, Lord. Best if I handle this myself from this point." The chef-tasker, scowling with full fury, addressed the supposed male slave. "Strip!" she commanded, and she carried on as a clever solver of problems. "You see, the experimental enzymes were designed to change males into alpacans. But this slave must be not a male. This slave must be a female." The attendants helped with the humiliating process, removing the wretched clothing, as the slave passively did nothing to resist. It was true, then. The slave was not a male slave. However, neither was the slave a female. "Abomination!" said the chef-tasker. "Abomination!" "Relax," said the Marquis. "Just relax. No need for anger or fear. It's not the edge of the world, you know." Everybody knew what was meant by abomination. The slave's physique featured neither male nor female genitals, no penis, no vagina. That could only mean that at teenagehood The enzyme responsible for differentiating had not activated in this case. The individual had not genderfied, had remained purely neutral, neither a he nor a she. For one thing, it was useless for breeding purposes.
"Why didn't you report yourself?"
inquired the chef-tasker.
"You had any number of chances to be honest."
The slave, definitely an it, said nothing. No point. Death was drawing nearer and nearer. Clearly it was useless to everyone. The knives of the drivers will be sharp. It's the edge of the world for me. It turned to the Lord's painting once more, and directly asked, "Am I in there?" It pointed and tried to see if there was any trace of the mound where it had hidden. It had become insanely intimate with that piece of ground today. The Marquis responded directly. "I didn't paint you into the painting, I don't think, but check this out." And the Marquis walked up to the panel, grabbing a brush dipped in oil paint. He made a little black dab, then touched it up tenderly with green and brown. "You see, this is you, the second I saw you look at me from right over there. So now you're in the painting. Fascinating, is it not?" "Yes, fascinating." The chef-tasker was not fascinated. She was fuming. She had just witnessed a Marquis Lord of the Frontier breaking the chain of interaction. There would be consequences. There would be penalties for guilty parties. The it, utterly indifferent, recalled its unlikely survival thus far in life, concealing its lack of sexuality over the years, blurting things out, then blending back into the herd, navigating any number of close calls down to evading the gray patch panthera and the condoro. Everything had come down to this, and being thus far still alive. The oddball slave addressed its master face to face. "Am I useful to your wood panel, Mr. Marquis?"
"My lord,"
protested the chef,
"we really ought to have a word. In private."
The Marquis agreed. They walked, the two of them, around the painted panel and a short way into the landscape. An attendant was made to bring them stools upon which to sit. Meanwhile, Slave imagined the two of them appearing within the multicolored panel. Then the sexless slave had a strange imagined thought. Perhaps they were discussing a solution, and the Marquis Lord was going to make this unusual slave useful by taking it into private service as a personal attendant. Its job would be to carry brushes and colored oils. Mostly, its purpose would be to comment upon painted scenes, to confirm whether this or that image or scene was fascinating. The strange imagined thought was painful in the hope it offered. Chef and Lord returned, the chef scowling intensely as before. The Marquis said, "How did you stay alive?" The slave, fired up with hope, responded, I scavenged an alpacan carcass. I didn't kill it. Panthera slayed him." "I see. But how did you survive the cold night?" "I slept with an alpacan. I see. And do you think my painting is enchanting? Yes, yes. And I think it's very useful too. There was some tranquillity. The slave grimaced, which passed for a Varusian smile, and surveyed the batch of women slaves, all of them watching, though out of voice range. The slave wondered which among them was antisocial. Hard to tell. Another strange imagination came to mind. If the masters could shift people down into being animals, couldn't they easily shift one poor slave up into becoming someone who was allowed to speak directly with lords and ladies? Well, then, said the Marquis Lord of the Frontier, emerging from deep, lordly thought, that's pretty fascinating. And he turned to the chef Tasker and said, You know what must be done. What must be done? You know what must be done. Lord went on to a fresh panel, ignoring the whole drama, and started to paint as the drivers tied the arms of the aberrant slave, the abomination. They got some rags and wiped off some of the grime from face and arms, threw a poncho over top of it. Its head popped up through the hole in the thick alpacan hair blanket. What must be done? The chef Tasker knew. Would it be cruel not to inform the captive of what must be done? Probably this Tasker thought so. She chose what also was cruel, mentioning what would happen to the Marquis because of the slave's crimes. As they walked, scowling chef Tasker said to silent slave, Oh, too bad about what you did to the Lord. The Collegio of Lords and Ladies won't like that you two spoke directly. They'll probably force him to surrender this area back over to another Marquis of the Frontier, or over to a grandee of the urbanity. They'll build a town over your precious wild field. Shame about that wasted work you and all these alpaca boys did. But rules keep Varusian society from crumbling into entropy. Entropy, you know. Entropy is the decay of all patterns. It may be a fascinating part of nature, but it's anathema to true higher society and its mastery over uselessness. Yeah, whatever, thought the slave. How terrifying it would be for you to lose your job of going between master and slave. You'd be useless without that particular function. Truth was, the slave had acquired bits of information already over time about what happened to you as an unbreedable it. Varusian ways were based on everything being useful. So, as an unbreedable, failing to genderfy, you were supposed to be exiled, whatever that meant exactly. You had to go through the 50-50 ceremony. The 50-50 determined by chance whether you would receive a fascinating prize or a severe and painful penalty. That's how it worked on the disk planet Vars, where our greatest hope, as the saying went, is that in the end, everything and everyone will be made ever more useful.